I'm a museum curator. My job is to make meaning from things. Meaning is when you understand something both here and here. Earlier this year, I had an opportunity to work with a group of things unlike any I'd ever worked with before. Many of you here probably visited the makeshift memorial after the Boston Marathon bombing. People all over the city were trying to make sense of what had happened. And there at Copley Square, on the ground and hanging from the trees, were all of these things. And at Copley, there was only so much you could understand about these things. You could see that people had left different kinds of objects there: hats, t-shirts, signs, running shoes. You could tell there was a lot of raw emotion. But in that environment, out on the street, with so many people and so much stuff, you knew something powerful was going on, but you couldn't quite understand what it meant. Fast forward to February of this year, and I'm standing in the reading room at the Boston City Archives in West Roxbury, surrounded by boxes. Along with a group of colleagues, I'm organizing an exhibition of the objects from the makeshift memorial for the one-year anniversary of the bombing. I've got 5 days to put my eyes on the entire collection. Thousands of objects, box by box, piece by piece. So I can decide which ones we're going to use and how we're going to structure the exhibition. I'm the first person to do this systematic looking at the entire collection. The first opportunity to understand what these objects mean. To get to the city archives, I've taken the 36 bus all the way to the end of the line, down an industrial cul-de-sac at the edge of the city. The reading room is quiet. Outside, it's snowing heavily. Copley Square in April feels very far away. I start with the paper items first. Handwritten notes, small signs. Everything is dirty. They've been dried and fumigated, but you can tell these objects spent weeks outside in all kinds of weather. The first few hours are really hard. The things people write are so powerful, so raw. I thought I'd resolve my own emotion from the bombing, but these objects are bringing it all back up. By that afternoon, as I come across my 48th, I will never forget this, my 53rd, we stand with you, my 60th, Boston, you're my home, I'm starting to understand what this collection is all about. Each time, the words are slightly different, but together they are grasping for a common language. All these individual voices, each with something they need to say to the rest of us. Thousands of everyday people returning to the place where it happened to give tangible form to their experience, trying to fill the hole in the city with all of these things. By the time I climb back on the 36 bus that evening, I am filled to the brim with their shock and their grief, with their stories of where they were that day, with their heartbreak for the families of the 4 killed, for the survivors, for the first responders. And then it's day 2. And at this point, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to get through all these boxes. Our schedule is so punishing. I've got about 3 seconds to spend on each piece. 3 seconds to figure out if something makes it onto my short list. I can't afford to get lost in anything, not even the note from one of Martin Richards' teachers, or this, or this. I'm trying to stay on track, but I feel like I'm experiencing some psychological version of repetitive stress syndrome, subjecting myself to these messages over and over again. I'm thinking what this project really needs, Andy, is a robot. A robot that doesn't have to feel or sleep. A robot that can absorb the intensity of this collection and keep on going. But I'm not a robot. I have no choice but to stuff it all deep inside me, open another box, and keep listening to what these objects have to say. Somewhere along the way, I come across this, and it sticks with me. Simple sign, we choose love. We have a choice in how we respond to this event, and we can choose something better. And then it's day 3, and at this point, I'm learning to live with the constant possibility of tears. But let's be clear, I cry just as much for the ways that people rise to the occasion and offer their best selves as I do for their heartbreak. When it comes to crying, we each have our own triggers. I'm sure you know what yours are. Mine has always been people coming together for small acts of community. I cry every time I go to vote at my local polling place in Roslindale, and I see my neighbors all there for the same purpose. I cry when I stand along the marathon route and I watch Bostonians handing out orange slices and cheering on perfect strangers. So this collection presents trigger after trigger for me. 10 miles ran for Boston in St. Albans, Vermont. The glorious Higgins Hawks are keeping watch for you. I commit to becoming a physical therapist to honor and heal those who lost so much. At this point, I think it's pretty clear we could just rename this talk Things That Make Me Cry. And I keep noticing the pronouns. Sure, there are plenty of I's. I can't believe, I feel so. But there are also so many yous and we's. All these everyday people using these objects to reach out to one another. In the midst of tragedy, they're seeking belonging and connection. They want to be part of something larger than themselves, a company of mourners, a city, a global running community, a world that does better than this. On the morning of day 4, I opened the first box of running shoes. You knew this was coming, right? There are 130 boxes of shoes, 130 boxes. And it only takes me 2 of those boxes to understand how these objects are different than the others. For the most part, all the other objects at the makeshift memorial didn't really have much meaning before the bombing. Blank pieces of poster board, teddy bears from the local CVS, run-of-the-mill t-shirts. It wasn't until after the bombing when somebody took that object, wrote a message on it, and added it to the growing pile at Copley Square, that it truly had meaning. But the running shoes, they're different. They had deep meaning before. They were trusted gear, marked with wear. A runner wouldn't have parted with them easily. Many were talismans, decorated before the race to help their runner summon the motivation for all of those miles. So the loss and the resilience that they embody after the bombing isn't the first or the second, but the third layer of meaning. Indeed, running is a metaphor woven throughout this entire memorial. Lace up your shoes and run for those who can't. We will not run in fear. We will finish the race. Running is a challenge, a joy, a promise of forward momentum. On April 7th, through the monumental efforts of many people, the objects I've chosen go on display at the main branch of the Boston Public Library, just steps from the marathon finish line and from Copley Square, where these objects first came together. And in the exhibition, it's not like standing out at Copley with objects in huge piles. We've pared them down and organized them so you can stop and linger on each one and understand what it's trying to say to you. The running shoes are at the center where they belong, 150 pairs, toes facing outward, like they would if the runners themselves were standing there looking right at you. And at the end of the exhibition, we place 4 trees. We ask visitors to write messages to hang on the trees, messages about what they want for the future, for Boston and the world. And at first, I think they'll leave the same kinds of messages on the trees that they left at Copley Square, and to some extent, that's true. There's plenty of Boston strong and I love my city. But there's also something more, some change, some turning the corner, some searching for a way forward together. And this has been the point all along, to use the meaning in these objects, the deep human connection they are seeking, to build some lasting positive change that can be a silver lining to the bombing, to hold us accountable to each other, to build a community of Bostonians that cares and connects beyond the finish line. This year's marathon was on April 21st, remember? And on the 22nd, the day after, I felt a change in the energy in the city. Maybe you felt it too. Probably not for the survivors or for anyone who was deeply affected by that event, but for most Bostonians, we had finished our year of mourning. And now that that mourning is fading, I want to make sure we don't forget these messages from our fellow Bostonians. They bind us together, and they continue to hold us accountable to each other. There are many issues that need tending in our city, our schools, our neighborhoods, the growing divide between rich and poor, ongoing violence. How do we continue to care for each other? How do we build resilience and community engagement that goes deeper and farther than Boston Strong? This is the work of year 2 and year 3 and year 4. This is the work these objects are asking of us. To not forget that when faced with something that shook us to the core. Our instinct was to turn toward each other, not away. This, ultimately, is what these objects mean. Thank you.